"There he is, officer. That's the man who broke into my house. Arrest him." The voice, shrill, panicked, theatrical, cut straight through the quiet suburban afternoon. I stood there at the foot of my own driveway, suitcase handle in my fist, watching red and blue lights paint stripes across the facade of my own home. The woman pointing at me from my own front porch, wearing what I was now certain was one of my late wife's silk kimonos, was Barbara Klein, HOA president of our subdivision, and she had apparently been living in my house for the past 2.5 weeks. She called the police on me for trespassing on my own property while she was the one occupying it. But what Barbara didn't know, what she had absolutely no way of knowing, was that my early return wasn't a coincidence, and the phone in my hand wasn't there for vacation photos. She had just walked directly into the most technologically comprehensive trap of her life. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. My entire career is built on one principle: trust nothing, verify everything, and document everything twice. When Barbara decided my home would make a lovely free vacation rental while I was working overseas, she didn't account for the fact that I had designed my own security system, a network that went considerably beyond motion sensors and doorbell cameras. She saw a quiet tech professional who traveled frequently and yielded to HOA pressure. She didn't see the digital infrastructure watching every room in that house from every angle. She didn't see me. Let me take you back to the beginning. I bought the house after years of grinding in city apartments while building my consultancy. It was a large, modern structure, glass and steel, oak-lined neighborhood, the kind of neighborhood with more lawn care services per capita than a professional golf course. My home was supposed to be my sanctuary. The one detail I had underestimated was the Homeowners Association and its president.
My first encounter with Barbara came less than a week after I moved in. She appeared on my doorstep holding a clipboard like it was a sacred document, platinum blonde ponytail pulled severely back, wearing resort wear that was expensive but slightly ill-fitting, the visual equivalent of projecting a status she didn't quite possess. She drove a 10-year-old Mercedes she kept spotlessly polished. Perfect metaphor. She informed me, with a smile that never came anywhere near her eyes, that my mailbox was non-compliant. I had chosen a sleek black steel design that matched the house's architecture. The approved model was a faux colonial monstrosity in forest green. $50 per day in fines until corrected. I tried to explain that the mailbox was part of the home's design language. It was like reasoning with concrete. The rules are the rules for a reason. They maintain the aesthetic integrity of our community. I looked from her face to my hyper-modern glass house and genuinely wondered what aesthetic she was referring to. To avoid a war while still unpacking, I bought the ugly green mailbox. That was my first mistake. It showed her I would fold. The violations that followed were a cascade of petty authority. My garbage bins were visible from the street for 45 minutes past the designated pickup window. My ornamental Japanese maple wasn't on the pre-approved flora list. A package left on my porch for 3 hours warranted a written warning, an eyesore, according to the letter she slid into my now compliant mailbox. My neighbor Arthur, a retired engineering professor who had watched Barbara run the HOA for a decade, caught me one afternoon measuring my lawn height with a ruler. He chuckled. "Getting the Barbara treatment, I see. She's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for years. Lives in one of the smaller original ranch houses at the entrance.
I think she's genuinely envious of anyone who moves into one of the newer places." Then came a major project, a high-stakes contract in Tokyo requiring a full month overseas. I couldn't pass it up. As required by the HOA bylaws for any absence longer than 2 weeks, I sent a formal notification to the board with my travel dates. Leaving May 1st, returning June 1st. Then I activated my security system and flew to Japan. The system I had built wasn't off the shelf. Every door and window was censored. Internal and external cameras provided total coverage. The smart home platform logged every interaction: thermostat, refrigerator, appliances, everything. It was less a security system and more a digital witness that never slept. The first week in Tokyo was all meetings and presentations. In the second week, I started noticing anomalies. I'm someone who lives by data and patterns, and the patterns coming out of my house were wrong.
A small alert I had configured for myself. The master bedroom thermostat had been manually shifted from its energy-saving away mode of 65 degrees to a very comfortable 72. I flagged it mentally. 2 days later, another alert. The smart refrigerator, which tracks inventory through weight sensors on the shelves, registered additions: a gallon of 2% milk, a brand of yogurt I had never purchased, and a bottle of inexpensive Chardonnay. I don't drink cheap Chardonnay. I pulled up the live media server feed. Someone had accessed my streaming account the previous night and watched 3 hours of a reality television show about wealthy housewives. This was not a glitch. I navigated to my secure camera portal and pulled up the internal feeds. There, on my living room couch, were Barbara and her husband Gary. She was draped in one of my cashmere throws, sipping from one of my crystal wine glasses. He was channel surfing with my remote control. Shoes off, feet on my ottoman.
They were watching my 85-inch television like they owned it, because for the past week they had been acting as though they did. The HOA bylaws included a provision requiring homeowners to provide an emergency access key, a rule I had fought against for security reasons and lost. Barbara, as president, was custodian of those keys. She had seen my email with my return date, waited until she was confident the house would be empty for a month, and moved herself in. The cold efficiency of it was staggering. I wanted to call the police immediately. The rage was real and justified. But the professional part of my brain, the part my clients pay a premium for, took over immediately. It would be my word against hers, remotely, from 12 time zones away. She was the HOA president, a local authority figure with a ready-made cover story. Any competent lawyer could spin an emergency inspection narrative. I needed irrefutable proof, not just footage. Evidence of intent, evidence of a plan to conceal. She thought she was having a discreet vacation. She had no idea she had just become the star of her own privately produced documentary series. I was the executive producer. For the next week, I became a digital ghost, haunting my own house from my laptop in Tokyo. Every spare moment between client meetings, I gathered evidence with forensic precision. Dedicated encrypted folders labeled by category: video, audio, data logs, subject profiles. I downloaded footage from all 16 cameras, crystal clear HD video of Barbara and Gary eating at my dining table, sleeping in my bed, using my kitchen. The most infuriating footage came from my master closet, a custom-built room with cedar lining and specialized lighting that I had designed partly to preserve my late wife Eleanor's belongings. She had passed 2 years earlier, and I hadn't been ready to part with her things. I have footage of Barbara in that closet, trying on Eleanor's clothing, standing in front of the mirror with one of Eleanor's favorite scarves around her shoulders. That footage transformed the mission from professional principle into something deeply personal. But I couldn't let emotion drive the process. I documented everything. The smart home logs gave me a minute-by-minute timeline of the occupation. Every time they used the sound system, every playlist. The espresso machine showed the exact consumption of my premium coffee beans. A power consumption spreadsheet proved they had hosted overnight guests. One evening, I watched in cold silence as they entertained another couple on my back patio, serving them my best single malt scotch and, this is the detail that still makes my jaw tighten, bragging about the perks of being on the HOA board. The key I needed was proof of intent, evidence that Barbara knew she was there illegally and had a plan to cover it up. My state operates under one-party consent for audio recording, and since I was the owner of the property and party to the surveillance of my own home, the recordings were legally obtained. I remotely activated the microphone on the camera in my home office, where Barbara seemed to spend a considerable amount of time. Almost immediately, I struck gold. She was on a phone call with a friend, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Oh, it's fabulous, Marge. The owner is some rich tech nerd off in Asia for a month. The house is just sitting here. The least I can do is make sure everything is operational. She laughed. Gary is in heaven with the 85-inch TV. We'll be sad to go back to our little shoebox next to the main road. The smoking gun came 2 days later. I was monitoring live when Barbara and Gary had a disagreement in the kitchen. Gary sounded nervous, which, based on everything I'd observed, was his default state around her. Barb, are you sure about this?
What if he comes back early? Her response was sharp, dismissive, and devastating.
He won't. I have his itinerary. He's not due back until the 1st. We just have to make sure we're completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up, and he'll never even know we were here. I saved the file, labeled it Exhibit A, Mens Rea, and backed it up to 3 separate secure servers. I had her lying, scheming, stating her intent explicitly, and admitting her cover-up plan, all in broadcast-quality audio captured by equipment she didn't know existed. I sent a heavily encrypted email to my lawyer, David Chen, a sharp, no-nonsense litigator I'd worked with before. Subject line, urgent, highly unusual matter. I attached a single low-resolution still image of Barbara on my couch and a short, password-protected clip of her "he'll never know" conversation. His reply arrived within the hour. Call me now. When I reached him on a secure line, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then a low whistle. Frank, in 20 years of practicing law, I have seen some truly brazen things. But this is a masterpiece of idiotic entitlement. He wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was an enthusiastic partner in what came next. We mapped out the strategy carefully. The key was timing. I would not return June 1st as announced. I would return May 15th, 2 weeks early. We would let Barbara get comfortable, let her settle into her routine, and then I would simply come home. David's argument for the early return was precise. It would catch her off guard, force her to react emotionally in front of witnesses, and eliminate any possibility of her claiming she was there to prepare for my arrival. I booked the flight. He cleared his calendar. The trap was set. The 12-hour flight felt like the longest journey of my life, not from fatigue, from coiled anticipation. I reviewed the evidence one final time with David through the plane's spotty Wi-Fi.
His final message before I landed? Let her make the first move. Let her call the cops. Her own arrogance will be her undoing. Be calm. Be factual. Let me handle the legal. I landed, cleared customs on global entry, and deliberately took a cab rather than my usual car service. I had the driver drop me 2 blocks from my street, right past Barbara's own house. Her Mercedes was in her driveway, which meant she was definitively not at home. I adjusted my jacket, extended my suitcase handle, and walked the last 2 blocks at an unhurried pace. As I rounded the final corner, there she was. Barbara, lounging on one of my expensive chaise chairs on the front porch, wearing Eleanor's silk kimono over her clothes, a book in her lap, wine glass in hand. She looked completely at home, the self-appointed queen of someone else's castle. I kept my phone raised, recording discreetly exactly as David had advised. I walked up the long driveway at a steady pace. She didn't notice me at first, lost in her own delusion. Then she glanced up. The sequence of expressions that crossed her face was remarkable. Confusion first. Who was this man walking so deliberately toward her? Then recognition, arriving like a cold wave. Then pure, undiluted panic. The color drained from her face, the wine glass trembled. Then, and this was the part Arthur had warned me about, the part David and I had been counting on, the panic was immediately consumed by aggression. Her posture straightened. The fear converted to offense. "Who are you?" she demanded, voice tight. "This is private property." I stopped at the foot of the porch steps and set my suitcase down calmly. "Hello, Barbara. I live here." The blood came rushing back to her face, turning it blotchy red. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "The owner isn't due back for 2 weeks." She had just confirmed her own awareness of my schedule in front of the camera, still running in my hand. She reached for her phone, lunged for the offensive.
"You're a trespasser. I'm calling the police." Her voice carried across the manicured lawns. Neighbors appeared at windows. Good, I thought. Perfect. I stood completely still and let her do it. The sirens arrived within minutes. 2 patrol cars, lights strobing. Officer Reed, young and eager. Sergeant Miller, older, weathered, and professionally calm. The kind of officer who has seen enough chaos to read a scene in about 10 seconds. Arthur appeared on his front lawn next door, watching with an expression that said he understood exactly what was happening. Barbara performed her best distressed homeowner impression for the officers. She pointed at me with a trembling finger. "That man is a trespasser. He came onto my property. I think he was trying to rob me. I am the HOA president. I'm responsible for this property while the owner is out of the country." The moment she invoked her HOA title as evidence of authority over my property in front of law enforcement, she had walked straight into the net. I raised my hand slowly, phone still in one, and spoke in a deliberate contrast to her hysteria. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. This is my house." Sergeant Miller looked at my driver's license, read the address. His posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, but it shifted. He looked at Barbara. "Ma'am, his address matches the property." She insisted it meant nothing. He could have stolen the ID. He could have forged it. She was staking everything on a title she had fabricated into authority. I walked past her to the front door. The biometric lock. I placed my thumb on the panel. Electronic chime. Click of the deadbolt. The heavy door swung open an inch. The silence that followed was complete. You cannot forge a fingerprint in real time. I turned back to the officers.
Barbara looked like a statue commemorating the exact moment of a catastrophic error. Furthermore, I said, I have comprehensive time-stamped documentation of who has been illegally residing in my home and using my property for the past 17 days. On cue, David's sedan pulled to the curb. He walked up carrying his briefcase with the calm authority of a man who had done this before. He shook Sergeant Miller's hand, introduced himself, and then proceeded to lay out the situation with clinical precision. This was not an inspection or a wellness check. This was a 17-day residential occupation by a person who had no legal authority over the property. We had the evidence to prove it in full detail. David opened his briefcase, pulled out a tablet, and pressed play on Exhibit A. Barbara's own voice filled the afternoon air. "We just have to make sure we're completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up, and he'll never even know we were here." The officers' faces, which had been professionally neutral, hardened. They looked at the tablet. They looked at Barbara. Then the front door creaked open wider behind me. Gary peered out, pale, sweating visibly, wearing the expression of a man who has been waiting for this moment with dread for 3 weeks. He saw the officers. He saw the lawyer. He saw my face. He cracked immediately. "I'm so sorry," he said, stepping onto the porch. I told her this was a terrible idea. I didn't want any part of this. She made me do it." His panicked confession was the final nail, delivered voluntarily in front of witnesses. Sergeant Miller took one deliberate step toward Barbara. His entire demeanor had shifted. "Barbara Klein, you have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs ratcheted shut in the quiet afternoon. As Officer Reed guided a whimpering, utterly deflated Barbara toward the patrol car, Arthur caught my eye from his lawn and gave me a single, slow nod of approval.
She had not been deposed in a boardroom. She had been arrested in a public spectacle on the steps of the home she had tried to steal. The legal process was swift. Faced with hours of high-definition video, comprehensive server logs, and a damning audio recording of her stating her own intent to conceal, her attorney advised a guilty plea to a lesser felony charge. She received 3 years of probation, a substantial fine, mandatory counseling, and full restitution for all property consumed or damaged, calculated down to the individual coffee bean. David presented the itemized bill to her attorney. I later heard it was its own form of humiliation. She and Gary were ultimately forced to sell their house to cover the legal fees and the restitution. The last time I saw them, they were loading a moving truck. When the restitution check arrived, I endorsed it directly to a local charity providing housing for people experiencing homelessness.
It seemed the most appropriate destination for money obtained from such a profound abuse of shelter. The HOA transformation was equally decisive. David and I attended the emergency board meeting with the evidence projected onto the community clubhouse screen. Fellow homeowners who had been fined for the wrong shade of patio furniture watched footage of their enforcer hosting dinner parties on my patio with my scotch. The emergency key bylaw, the weapon Barbara had used to enter my home, was put to a floor vote. It was rescinded unanimously. The remaining board resigned in the aftermath. An election was held. I declined multiple nominations. I nominated Arthur instead. He accepted to a standing ovation and went on to lead a significantly more reasonable association. One actually focused on the community rather than policing it. Weeks later, life had returned to a new and genuinely peaceful normal. The ugly green mailbox was gone, replaced by my original black steel design. I sat on the back patio one evening where Barbara had entertained her friends with my single malt, poured myself a glass of that same scotch, and let the quiet settle. The crickets. The distant laughter of children. The air that didn't feel like it belonged to someone else anymore. What I kept coming back to sitting there was the fundamental miscalculation she had made. She looked at me and saw a quiet tech professional who traveled too much and had caved on a mailbox. She didn't see someone whose entire career was built on observing patterns, gathering data, and waiting with absolute patience for the right moment. She thought she was a wolf who had found an unguarded pen. She didn't know the pen had been watching her the entire time. Here's the thing about bullies, whether they operate in corporate boardrooms or suburban subdivisions. They build their power on the assumption that you won't push back, that the cost of fighting seems too high, that you'll fold on the mailbox and keep folding.
They are almost always wrong about the people they've underestimated most completely. And when those people finally push back, with facts, with evidence, with patience and precision, the authority crumbles fast. Because it was never real authority, it was theater. And theater collapses the moment someone in the audience refuses to believe it. If this one landed somewhere real for you, if you've dealt with a Barbara of your own, drop your story in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe and stay around. The next one is already in motion.